Welcome back to Moscone West. You're watching theCUBE's live coverage. This is day 3 of RSAC 2026. We've been here multiple years now. I'm Dave Vellante. Christophe Bertrand is my co-host, and Art Gilliland is here. He's the CEO of Delinea. Good to see you again, Art. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You've been a great part of the theCUBE and the NYSE Wired network, so really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'd love to start, a couple years ago, the theme of RSA at the time, I don't think it was called RSAC, was security has an identity crisis.
That's right.
I don't think that's changed. I mean, the core idea here, you don't need to slow down AI, but you need to modernize identity and security. Right. That's kind of your raison d'etre. What does that all mean to you and to the industry and your customers?
Yeah, I think if you survey CIOs right now or CISOs in the marketplace, I think identity security shows up at like one of the top 2 or 3 things that they're focused on in terms of budget or priority. And I think the reality is it's still sort of playing that weird in between sort of infrastructure and security. But the reality is that's how you get access to the environment. It's one of the things that the adversary is looking for to try to elevate, and companies still just haven't figured it out. And so I think the reality is there's a lot of focus on identity security today, and then of course AI, the new craze that you're going to hear everywhere in this RSA, but identity is going to be the way you capture and help to manage and control that as well.
And then of course bringing privileged access to agents.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the...
I think in my mind, like, AI agents are privileged users. They're getting access to all your sensitive data, and you're then now connecting them to workflow, so they're behaving in your environment like a human with like super access and super speed. And so you're going to want to really understand what are they accessing, what's their risk, and then how do you manage that and make sure that they're not doing stuff that they shouldn't do.
You have so much pressure from organizations to move fast, but if you move too fast, you give too much access to agents. Hence your
breaking
model.
stuff. Yeah, exactly. There's our reason d'etre right there. Is too much access to either humans and or machines that are taking action in your environment.
So let's talk about that, because it seems to me that what we're doing is instead of de-risking the environment, which should be your job, well, now AI is out there and we have agents and extension of humans, and essentially agents are like humans who act without any consequence if they do something wrong, right? And they're also targets from the other guys who also use AI. So what's your position on risk, and are we in a world that is de-risking the infrastructure, or are we re-risking the infrastructure?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So Delinea just did a survey, 2,000 IT professionals around how they think about what's happening in AI, and there's some really interesting results that came out of that survey. And so what they said, and there's sort of 3 big things that you take away from that. One of them is there's this like difference between what they think they have and what they're actually doing. So they have their confidence level and what is actually happening, or there's a difference there. Second is visibility. What they think the visibility is, and then actually what they're doing around visibility. And the last is this relaxation of the policy to be able to create speed. And so those sort of big findings from the survey that create this sort of AI paradox, so this sort of like control paradox where they feel a lot more comfortable than they actually are implementing the security controls. And so there's a big divergence, and that I think is actually putting more risk on companies. And so being able to deal with and manage that, I think, is going to be the thing that a lot of companies and organizations are going to have to figure out how to do.
A couple more questions on that. I mean, you look at the infrastructure today and it's evolving very quickly. Do we have a data problem, or do we have an identity problem, or is it everything at the same time?
Yeah, well, so we're focused, Delinea is focused on the identity problem. I think there's both. I actually think it's a connection problem, right? And so it's the user, who is that user, what should they be allowed to do, what are their rights, what permissions should they have, and then those permissions give it rights or access to data. And I think that's really where the problem has always been. I think if you look at security in general, it's actually about trying to protect access to data, and everything else has been a proxy for how to do that in my mind. And so I think identity is sort of the front door of that, and then understanding the data and the risk is the second, and that connection is really what the problem is we're trying to solve as a security industry in my mind.
So what happens when security gets bypassed to keep AI initiatives moving? And how do organizations stop that from happening?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about how we're helping companies do that. So Delinea is focused on sort of 3 big things. First thing is visibility. How do you scan the environment, find out where AI is, find out the sanctioned, but also the unsanctioned. So you may have managers saying, yes, it's allowed, but is IT security actually watching it? Our survey of those 2,000 professionals would say they're allowing it, but they don't actually have visibility on it. So visibility is sort of part one. Part two is risk score it. So now I know where all those identities are and what they're connected to. You know, how valuable is the stuff they're talking to and how risky is it if that thing gets compromised? And then the last thing is take control of it and try to be able to manage and watch and then audit what it's actually doing. If it's doing things that it's not supposed to be doing, can you turn it off? And so that first part is visibility, second part is posture, is how we talk about it, and the last is control, and I think that's what Delinea is helping companies do today, and I think those are the big categories of things that companies are going to have to figure out how to work through.
It seems to me that we also have another problem, which is potentially a compliance issue, which is the fact that, and you talked about traceability. Well, I mean, at some point you're going to need to know who did what to whom and when, and including agents. So how do you see that sort of correlating with the other two topics we just covered, which is data identity? Is traceability and provability or audit trails something that's going to be super critical too?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that is part of the control part of it. You have to be able to do session recording. So in the human world, IT admins are logging in, you're recording those sessions, and then maybe they're being audited and someone's watching them, brain dead stuff work, but they're watching and there's some sort of compliance. In AI, you have to be able to do that same thing, but I don't think you can have humans watching that at that speed and the number of rates of those connections. So you actually have to have AI in the product, helping you do AI-driven audit, which is a feature of the Delinea platform. It allows you to watch those sessions, identify risky behavior, and then send those triggers to either a SOC, that could also be automated, or a human review. But that is the way you're going to start to say, look, allow visibility, manage the risk, but then control, and that control has to have some sort of auditability or visibility into what they're doing. Otherwise, you can't stop stuff in real time.
So humans, obviously can't keep up.
No.
Humans make mistakes, AI make mistakes. How do you sort of ensure that your AI is not doing what my AI does every day?
Making it up? Yeah, I mean, I think there has to be controls around it, and I think as people are getting more familiar with the different AI models you're putting in, you're giving it rule sets, you're giving it boundaries, but it's going to make mistakes. But the reality is it's going to make probably the same mistake, and so you can start to train it and get better, but it's going to be way faster than humans. And if you're going to fight the adversary who's using AI, it's way better to have AI that actually is making a mistake every now and then, because it's at least going to fight at the same speed. It's a little bit like, the Matrix, a human trying to fight one of those Matrix guys. Like, if you're not working at their speed, you're in big trouble, so at least work at their speed.
So are humans out of the loop at this point?
I think you still are going to want them in some part of the loop, but I do think ultimately over time you're going to see for certain automated jobs, you're just not going to be able to keep up. And so I think they're in the loop for escalated risk. So that's partly why the risk scoring part of posture is so important. The super risky connections, maybe you're going to have someone say yes to that. And there's a human that's going to review that. For different levels of risk, why not just automate all of those things? Like, the damage won't be that significant, or you can watch it on the tail end. And so I think we're going to dial in the risk scoring a lot better, and you have to be really good at that, and that's going to be how you decide when a human should review or not review.
So John Furrier loves to talk about, okay, there's the old way, here's the new way. So give us here's the legacy identity model, here's the modern identity security model, and here's what it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the legacy model is really a check-in, check-out, sort of manual human, sort of making connections to servers. I think if you think about sort of way that the infrastructure has changed, at least over the last decade, it's gone from on-premise data centers to cloud. Now it's, infrastructure as code. Like, the check-in, check-out model for users at that level is just going to be the old way you do it for the legacy architecture. With ephemeral infrastructure, it's got to be real time, it's got to be an automated sort of interaction, real time, just in time privilege authorization. It's one of the reasons we bought a company called StrongDM recently to add some more of those capabilities around Kubernetes and some of the other infrastructure as code into the privilege management process. That is the new way, and an AI is going to use that real-time insertion, that real-time authorization, because you're just going to have to do it that fast to keep up with the speed of AI.
Well, so okay, what's the benefit for the customer who gets this right and versus the one that doesn't?
The benefit for the customer is the adoption of this new capability. It's going to drive huge amounts of productivity enhancement, but to do it with the security controls that they need. And I think without this new architecture, without this new way of thinking about it, it's just going to be really difficult. Like you said, you're just putting a lot more risk on the enterprise to adopt these new technologies. And just to give you a sense, like we're reducing tickets in our support system using AI by 30%. My developers, I had 35 developers submit 40% of my code last month out of 300 because of AI enablement. Like that is huge productivity improvement from a company, but I got to do that in a way that's super secure. And so I think it's just, if you don't do it the new way, you're not going to be able to do that in a safe.
The new way seems to favor speed, but are we trading off speed versus security?
I think the new way allows you to do security fast. I think that's the reality of it, is the world is moving towards that automated, that sort of speed and machine speed sort of transactions. And so the new way actually allows you to enforce the exact same security policies and controls on that new architecture, and that's why the new way has to be done that way.
I mean, the nirvana has always been, things like governance and security and compliance are always blockers. Their nirvana is, how do you make those accelerants?
Make it seamless.
Yeah, and if it is seamless, then it can become an accelerant because you can build new products, new data products, new services, get them to market much more quickly. Is that what you're seeing in your customer base?
I mean, so the short answer is yes. If you look at a lot of the customers, they have rules they have to follow. There's regulatory environments. My customers demand a certain security level for not only the requirements like SOC 2 and FedRAMP and those kinds of criteria that you have to follow that are checkbox sort of requirements, regulatory, but they require us to attest to certain security controls and they audit us. And so for me to be able to adopt this new technology that's going to drive huge benefits to my company, I've got to be able to do that and still meet the requirements that my customers demand of me. And I think that's true in most industries. And so if you're going to adopt it and really push yourself into this new architecture, I don't get to go to my customers and say, yeah, I know we kind of relaxed these 5 policies because we wanted to go faster and we saved 20%, so my shareholders are happy, but I've just opened you up to a bunch of, I guess I don't get to say that. And so I think that's why you need these new capabilities and this new technology, so I can do that stuff, but do it in a way that's safe.
I've been saying a couple times this week, when I look back a few years ago, I felt like the cloud was the first line of defense in security. Is identity that new first line of defense? Is it agents are that first line of defense and you've got identity on the agents? And
yeah, I mean, so look, I'm biased. We're an identity security company, but I think if you look at almost all the major breaches, like 80 to 90% of them have an identity security escalation or an identity breach as a part of it. If you're not doing identity security, you're not actually getting in the way of the adversary in a way that's effective. And so I do think that identity has become that new entry. You see it happening in the organizational structures that companies have. I would say we're still probably in the 50-50. Identity still sits in infrastructure or does it sit in security? I think more and more you're starting to see AD and all of the identity infrastructure come over into the security world because of this realization that without managing and controlling the sort of access, you're actually just opening the door to the bad guy. It's way easier to log in than it is to break in right now, and so stealing your credential and just logging in is just cheaper and candidly, then you're invisible.
Better ROI for the
hackers. It's cheaper, one, but two, once you're inside, if you're an authenticated user, you're invisible. And so a lot of the security controls that you put in place, like you can't find that, and so they dwell for just a lot longer.
So should there be some mandates from government on identity? I mean, we've seen some new rules come out of the White House recently. Of course, there's all sorts of rules coming out around AI, around security from Europe. Some want to over-regulate, others want to deregulate. Okay, it's a pendulum, we get that.
Sure.
But candidly, should that be something that government looks into? Because we're talking about potentially deep national security type of consequences for some businesses, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there is a role to play for government to come in and give advice. Obviously they do that through the NIST standards, and identity is a big part of the NIST standards, and you see that in the newer versions of NIST. You see it also in private industry with PCI requirements or even underwriting for insurance. I mean, part of the big driver of demand for Delinea's products has been cybersecurity insurance. And if you're using our technology, your premiums are less, or in some cases you can't even get underwritten if you're not using a technology like ours. And so I think there's a role for that. But to be fair, like the technology moves so fast, and government has not historically been super responsive to new technology issues. I think it's going to be very difficult for them to effectively regulate. But I do think giving guidance, I do think having standards and having the industry play a role in helping to set those standards, I think is a really good idea.
I mean, I think there definitely could be collaboration between industry and governments.
Most definitely.
My criticism of the governments has been there's a lot of finger wagging in the past, which doesn't really help.
No.
But to the extent that there's constructive information sharing, obviously on threat intelligence, best practices, because obviously parts of the government are very good.
Yeah, it's like, hey, let's share data, you first.
Yeah.
So getting that stuff to actually be super productive. I think we saw some of that with Jen Easterly, and they started to do some more sharing. But we'll see how that plays out now.
Well, the theme of this industry is the power of community. So maybe that'll have an effect.
I think I think the private sharing that happens between CISOs and between the ISACs and some of those is actually quite productive. And so I think these kinds of shows, this kind of community where we get together, we talk about the issues we have, we can share information, I think is where you see the real benefit, and which is why I've been coming to RSA for 25 years.
And when the hyperscalers have played a role. You got Mandiant as part of Google, AWS obviously with its threat intelligence.
Yeah.
Microsoft clearly is a security leader.
The main platforms I think have stepped up quite a bit. I mean, I am hopeful that the AI technology platforms will realize how relevant they're going to be into the platform, and instead of just focusing on making money, they're actually going to realize they have a huge responsibility. I think it took the hyperscalers a while to figure that out. I think took Microsoft a while at the beginning to figure that out, but then they did, and they took it really seriously. I think the hyperscalers take it really seriously, and now AI is a new platform. It's a new development platform. It's a new platform for running companies. I think it's going to be up to them and the community to help to educate them that they need to take that seriously too.
Give us the business update, Art, on Delinea. What can you tell us? Where are you in funding? How's the balance sheet looking? Good runway. Good.
So I mean, if you think about sort of the history of the company, we started at sort of 60, 70 million of revenue when we first acquired Centrify. We're almost 500 million in ARR revenue now. We've been growing very significantly over the last several years. You can imagine about 5-year run. We're profitable, so we're not raising money. We're actually in the sort of stages of looking to see what's next strategically for the company as we go forward. So we're looking at continue to grow the business. We just acquired StrongDM, so we're out there making acquisitions with the cash we have, and so we're very active in the space, and we think we have a real opportunity to win in the identity security space.
Databricks made some noise yesterday, affected the market a little bit, freaked out a few people, but they're kind of the poster child for not going public, right? At the same time, there's some benefits, particularly around M&A and
of course,
and awareness. Thoughts on IPO? The market's kind of funky right now, obviously, with the war. And
look, if you look at the stock markets today, I think it's a hard place to be a public security company. If you look at the last couple IPOs, it's been complicated for those businesses. They're all good businesses. They continue to execute well, but you're getting your report card every day. I think Delinea is going to continue to look at its options and figure out what it thinks it needs to do. I think to be honest, you still have to be a great operating company, and that's what we're focused on today. Continue to execute the way we have been, which has been extraordinarily strong, and continue to innovate for our customers. And if we focus on those two things, whether we go public or whether we stay private, we've got a good future ahead of us.
We do think the market will eventually...
It can't get worse.
But don't say that. Don't say that.
Please.
Maybe I better knock.
We do think that the market will figure out that the marginal economics of software are actually a good thing, and that recurring revenue is actually
I think there's a scare right now, like which companies are going to be able to take advantage of AI in a real effective way, and which companies are going to be dislocated by it. In our opinion, identity has got a huge tailwind around AI. You're going to have to find it, you're going to have to identify what it's doing, and you're going to have to create risk scoring, and then you have to control and manage it. And you want to do that so you can adopt it at speed. And so we think AI is an awesome thing in the identity security space. I think in security in general, it's there. Whether that's true for every company, I don't know, but for the security domain, I think it's really true.
How do you feel about your engineering team?
So I love my engineering team. Obviously, they're very innovative. We went through a whole refactoring of the product team. I think what's going to be really interesting to see what happens is, how does AI change the landscape for engineers? I don't think engineers go away, for sure. I think they change skills. I mean, if you look at sort of the late 80s when you went from machine code to compiled code, there were people that still needed to go back and look at ones and zeros, and there were people that moved over into the compiled code and were writing in C, and that was sort of the future. This is that big of a transition, in my opinion. You are going to start to think about what does it mean to write code in an AI world. You're working on the plan, you're working on the structures, and then you're not going to look at the compiled code anymore. It's going to be written in languages you may not know. And so I think it unleashes a lot of different kinds of creativity, and I think we were wrong originally, at least at Delinea, around what kinds of people are going to be good at that. We realized actually it's a whole variable of people. There's, yes, the very senior architects who are really good at it, and then I got brand new product managers that are awesome at it too, and so I think it's going to be a reskilling of that area, and whether you know how to write in C or whatever, it's not going to matter at all. It's like, okay, are you good at Claude Code? Are you good at prompting and really understanding what the parameters are, and can you build a good plan? And if you can do that and really understand the customer problem, you're probably going to be a great coder in the next decade.
Are you saying I can't vibe code Delinea?
You could try to vibe code Delinea. I think this is the other fallacy. I think it's really easy to build up a product that works in a lab. But now put that product in a very complicated network in an enterprise, and it has to be up all the time and not fail. There's a lot of experience, and maybe you could vibe code your way through that in a year or 2 years with that company as your network, trying to traverse networks and understand the weird networking on a laptop and all the diversity and all the rules that they're breaking in their environment. There's a domain of experience that I think is very difficult to vibe code your way through, that I think established players just have an advantage. Yep. And if we adopt AI coding as fast as these startups, if I can get my team getting into AI coding now, and I do it before the rest of my competitors, it's like hitting hyperspace at Star Wars. Right. Like I can do it, as long as I'm 5 seconds ahead of you, I'm so far ahead you can never catch up. And so I think the domain of 9,000 customers, that level of understanding of the business, that ability to drive innovation, I think it gives the incumbent vendors like us a huge advantage, as long as we adopt the new ways and we have an architecture that can do that. And so I think our re-architecture, I think our focus on AI and driving in AI into the coding model so we can really understand how to do that securely and at scale and within the architecture parameters we have, I think it's a huge advantage as long as we keep moving.
And how about your go-to-market? How is that evolving? Where are you at?
I mean, look, that I think is the place where AI can have a play too up front. I still think people want to buy from people and at some point, but a lot of the work they're doing is before we even they talk to us. They've done 80 to 90% of their research. They understand sort of the domain of the technology. I think AI helps them do that research. But at the end, they're still going to want to talk to somebody. At least for products like ours. They want to have somebody they can call if there's a problem, they want to do that. And so I do think it changes the front end. I do think it changes how we interact with them, how we educate them before they even talk to us. And so there's a lot of work around that intent, creating your ideal customer profile, making sure they have access to our data, giving them live interactions so they can really compare and contrast us. But then they're going to want to talk to somebody.
Is that part of your filter when you're hiring go-to-market pros? Is it like how AI astute
yeah,
they
but we're training. Look, I think this idea of trying to hire for AI skill or out there, I think it's kind of a fallacy. I think people are driving up the price of all this stuff in the marketplace. I find it way easier to build our own talent.
Homegrown.
And so I would rather hire and train our own talent, get them sort of built up in the way that we do it. And so that's what we're focused on. I mean, look, doesn't mean we won't hire some people that have experience and have those talents, but I'd rather build it myself, and I think it's a fallacy to chase the next great AI coder, AI whatever. I mean, the reality is we're driving up the price, and they're not going to write it in the way we want them to do it. They're going to have their own view, or they'll be a free radical and won't fit into the culture. And so I think in general, building it yourself is just a better model.
Well, there's a lot of struggling to get employed, recent college grads that if they
I'm all about it.
Profile of
come to Delinea,
smart,
we want it.
Curious, right? Trustworthy, fun.
We run a huge intern program. We bring a lot of new hires into the business, what I call early experience hires. It's awesome. I mean, they bring energy to the old folks like myself that have been doing this for a long time, and to have that kind of vibe in the office if they'll come into the office. Although new hires tend to want to be in the office because that's where they're going to learn. And so I think that just creates a good energy for the company, and we're all about it.
Cool. Well, Art, great to see you again. Thanks so much for coming back in the
It's really good to talk to you both. Nice to chat to you.
All right, good deal. All right, keep it right there. This is Dave Vellante for Christophe, Bertrand. We're live here at RSAC 2026 in Moscone West. Stop by and see us. Keep it right there for more live action. We're right back right after this break.